Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Enkrypt AI podcast. My name is Lavanya, and I'm a product marketing manager here at Enkrypt AI. Today, we'll be diving into a conversation on responsible AI, especially as it intersects with the security and compliance and enterprise adoption. Here with us today is Nathan Trueblood, our CPO, and alongside us, we have Manske, who is a partner and national practice leader from Bekaert. And I'll let you take it over from here with a quick intro.
Great. It's nice to meet you. I'm glad to be here. So, a little bit about myself. I head up the national practice for cybersecurity and information assurance at Bekaert. Very happy to say that we've got a great relationship with Enkrypt AI and the folks there. We're digging in deeply on their tools, and we're very excited about that partnership and what it can do to help us understand and help our clients understand better AI risks that are happening in their environment. So, very excited to be here.
Thanks, We're glad you're here. And for everyone, I'm Nathan Trueblood, Chief Product Officer of Enkrypt AI. I've really been working in big data, ML, and AI for quite a long time. And I'm really excited about the promise that we see in the market from what AI can do for business. But we all know that the real limiting factor is trust. Can you trust the AI? Can you trust what it's doing? Can you trust the tools you're buying that have AI built into it? We really believe AI security and compliance is the ultimate unlock for adoption in AI. So all the promise is there, but what's slowing it back is trust. And so that's what we're here to talk about a little bit today with Kurt. So why don't we let's get going. Let's get into it.
Yeah, sounds good.
And maybe Kurt, I'll start us off. Walk us into a room from your perspective. So maybe a deal team is doing diligence on a potential acquisition, and they know AI is in the stack. You're in the audit and assurance practice here. So what's that conversation maybe that should be happening or is happening around how companies are thinking about acquiring technology or companies that have AI built in?
That's a great question, and I would preface my answer by saying that most of the time in a deal room when you're looking at a deal, you gotta assume that AI is being used somewhere as part of this deal, and it's amazing how fast the tentacles spread with AI. So part of the challenge is, you've got to understand how AI is being used, what risks are being created by it. Normally it's a product strategy or revenue type of story that's involved in this, but there's operational AI used too. In fact, we just had a conversation with a potential client talking about how Claude was going to be used to run kind of their production shop environment too, which we think is fantastic. So, if I'm in the deal room, I want to know what tools are in place today. Have they done an inventory? What's been approved? What's being governed? What sort of data is being connected to it? What sort of freebies are being used? What sort of risks are out there? Who's connecting and how? I think that the general theme here, Nathan, is organizations have a lot more AI exposure than they realize, and they got to get their hands wrapped around this very quickly especially when it comes to acquisitions and getting ready to be acquired.
Yeah, that's a big theme for us, especially, as Encrypt AI, we're really 100% focused on AI security and safety. And when I'm talking to customers as well, what I'm seeing is that people don't know what they don't know when it comes to the risk. And so, in the context of a diligence deal, there may be AI that's built into, the company you're acquiring's product or the way that they're using AI. But it's been moving really fast. And most of the customers I talk to have done sort of a high level or cursory assessment. It reminds me some of sort of the early days maybe of cybersecurity where, assessment of risk in a technology or in something you're acquiring is kind of at the survey level. Um, but like asking questions about risk, what have you done to test for bias? What have you done to test for potential security violations? What are the applicable regulations that apply to this particular AI that's maybe built into a product company that you're acquiring? But how do
Hmm.
you actually assess and measure that risk? So that's something that we think is a lot of our customers are kind of playing catch up. They're starting to become aware of just how broadly this stuff has become deployed, and now they're trying to assess what is their level of risk before they move ahead. And there isn't until Encrypt AI, there aren't really good tools for doing that.
That's correct. Yeah, there's
So
not a whole lot out there, which we think is a great tool. You've got these people need tools that are automated that can very quickly assess this risk. But a part of that depends on the inventory of the AI as well. So,
that's right. So I mean, so first, enterprises are assessing their inventory, or if it's in the context of an acquisition, what's inside of this company? What are they using? What are they doing? And then the second part of that is what's the risk surface associated with those tools? So when you think about this sort of governance or AI governance and assessing maturity, tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, when you're looking at the big picture for your clients, how does AI governance maturity really get assessed? Is there a framework that you use? Is it still folks mostly going on gut feel? How do you look at that?
So there's a lot of gut feeling going on, and I think my general take on that is, if the gut feeling is telling you there's some potential AI risk there based on some initial questions, then you probably got to move to the next stage, which I would call like a red flags assessment when you're looking at environment, which is you go out, you do an inventory, you have conversations with the people throughout the business to get a feel for how AI is being used, how it's being deployed, talk to the tech leaders, see what sort of shadow AI is out there. This red flag assessment is really kind of your initial overlay on inventory of AI throughout the organization. Once you get that understanding, you can really move into a deeper dive depending on the risks that you see. You may have find out you're using Claude Enterprise, Copilot, any number of tools out there. You may have some Maverick developers out there that are using OpenAI to do development, things like this. But you got to get your hands wrapped around what's being used. You'll find people are connecting AI to data lakes and data and doing all sorts of research, all good things that are operational focused, but again, they create risk, and that red flag should give you that kind of affirm your view that what you're saying from a gut feel, but then also give you a framework for understanding what AI risks are out there. And there's a lot of good frameworks out there. There's the NIST AI RMF, OWASP has one. There's ISO 42001. I kind of generally state, after the inventory, you talk about governance, you talk about data controls, you talk about third-party risk that is being created and included in this. You talk about monitoring. You talk about compliance demands. There's one of the things we're seeing a lot that's popping up a lot is AI is accessing data that could be considered private within these networks, and that brings in a whole slew of national and international privacy regs into the compliance risk profile. So the goal is to make sure you have a good grasp of risks before you move forward with this transaction.
Makes sense. And so I think what I hear you saying is, first understanding like what do you have here? Like what AI tools are in use? And then the second step would be, there are good frameworks that are out like NIST, RMF, OWASP Top 10 and others that would allow you then to do a focused assessment of the risk in a particular technology that you're acquiring. Right. And so that's where, Enkrypt AI, where we come in, which is we're moving far beyond sort of a survey, and now you can actually automate the process of testing for the specific risks in, say, the NIST RMF. And from that, then you really have a measure of what's the level of risk, whether it's in Copilot or Claude or some third-party AI that's included in what you're acquiring. Right. So I think that's what you're saying is going beyond just knowing what's there. It's doing the assessment of risk in a methodical way. And then that starts to become a roadmap for where you need controls. Do I have that right?
Correct. You do. Yeah. You start at the high level with your gut feel. You do that inventory, make sure it's accurate, and then you start doing the deeper dive where it feels necessary to get the feel for the risks that are out there in this part of this transaction or part of the AI deployment. It's well said.
And so then when you think about that, okay, so you do the assessment, um, then I think the next thing would be sort of maybe something for us to talk about is what does a good governance framework look like beyond that initial assessment? From my perspective, from a product view, would be wanting to put guardrails and governance in place so that you're continuously, like you do that initial assessment, but then you're continuously either reassessing or monitoring for potential policy risk. Something I'm seeing with a lot of customers, is particularly true with Copilot and others, is they don't know what's there. They've pushed broadly for adoption. Everyone's using AI,
Hmm.
and it's a little bit the Wild West. You can assess the risk in one of those AIs like Copilot, but then you need to put in continuous monitoring and guardrails so that you're
Hmm.
not seeing things like data exfiltration or PII. You want to know what employees are doing or what these tools are doing, not just what they have access to statically, but also sort of continuously. And that's where guardrails, are increasingly seeing adoption everywhere around AI as a way to create observability and have control. So what are some of the other aspects or things that you would want to see in place with an enterprise when it comes to putting in a good governance framework around AI?
So, the big picture here is that I would say that executive leadership teams and boards, they feel like AI is a strategic initiative. And I always put within the context of that discussion is if you feel like it's a strategic initiative, then you got to have governance around it, right? You'd want to know this for build out of a plant or anything along those lines. You want to make sure things are going well. The tricky thing about AI is that when you talk about governance, security, and guardrails, it's not something, it's a one-time deployment. You don't write up a document, roll in the control set, roll in the governance, and then walk away and expect it to be maintain it's where it's at. Apologize for a cough there. You've got to make sure that this is a living type of governance model that needs to be reviewed and evaluated on a regular basis, and it needs to change depending on how AI is deployed in the organization. There's going to be new models popping up. There's going to be new data access points that are popping up that need to be cataloged and logged and monitored and managed. And there needs to be some sort of automation in place to provide that view of what needs to change on an ongoing basis. A lot of people want to turn up a tool, turn up AI, and then call it good. Doesn't work that way. There's just too much risk. Look at the same model 6 months from now. I mean, we're finding things about AI bots having communications with each other that people didn't even know about 6 months before an AI bot was created. So it is kind of a wild, wild west, but at the same time, with the right tools, it can be monitored.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point about the way that things are changing and the sort of assessment model is shifting because you're absolutely right. Due to the stochastic nature of AI, those models can be changing. The system prompts, whatever is around those models from a protection perspective, are shifting and changing pretty rapidly, especially with the rate of innovation that's happening. And so it's not something where you can assess the risk in an AI capability and an AI feature and something you're acquiring. You can't just do it once and call it done. And what we're
Correct.
seeing is customers are doing an initial assessment, which is really important, moving beyond sort of putting your head in the sand and just going on, hope that you're not at risk. Doing that assessment so you know where the risk is, but then you quickly realize you need to sort of get into a mode of continuous assessment and have those guardrails there so that you're always got that observability around, is new risk being introduced? Are we seeing new kinds of behaviors that we weren't aware of before?
Yeah,
So
Nathan,
then,
one of the things I always like to tell my clients is that they don't realize that a lot of people don't realize. For example, let's go back to cybersecurity. How many attempts happen on a company firewall every day? And that just provides context. And if you think that's a lot, consider how many hundreds of thousands of AI decisions are made every day without formal oversight and governance. And then when you think about that context, you realize you got to have a governance model that can move quickly with the organization to manage risk.
that is exactly right. You need that governance model and you need those guardrails to create observability around where risk is happening in AI. That's exactly right. Um, and yeah, it's amazing what we're seeing every day in terms of what my customers or our customers are discovering in terms of things that people are doing with AI that we had no idea. And without that governance layer, without that essentially guardrail monitoring, you don't know where you may be getting exposed to new risk. So that's that sort of
Absolutely.
continuous assessment. We've been doing a number of projects lately with some very large enterprises, and it's just been fascinating to me. You turn Copilot loose in the organization, and people are doing amazing things with it. Also, the amount of risky behaviors and things that are happening in there that are putting the company potentially at serious regulatory risk. There's not a lot of visibility into what's happening unless you put in a proper governance model there. So yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it's fascinating. I mean, again, people are being very productive, but these tools are powerful, and the risks are shifting pretty frequently.
And
So
you
speaking
take
of,
that the next step. You take that the next step. The tools are even powerful for the adversarial parties here too. They're using it. They're using AI against AI to get where they want to go. So
that's
it just
right. Yeah.
multiplies.
Well, yeah, and I think just last year, Gartner came out with a study, essentially said anyone, or basically 73% of enterprises who are doing anything with generative AI have already been attacked. And that's
Yep.
just covering the security aspect of it, which is more of an external threat. But on the inside, beyond the security threats, where perhaps malicious employees are trying to bypass security mechanisms or get access to
Mhm.
information they're not supposed to. Beyond that, there's just a lot of risky compliance violations from an overall company policy perspective. That's one of the
Yeah, I'm
interesting
gonna.
things we're seeing is that companies are not only interested in assessing security risk, but also, what are the regulatory frameworks that we're exposed to? What are the behaviors in AI that we're missing that may result in a compliance violation?
Yeah, and you think about it, the good old days. I go back to my pen testing days. Um, the easiest part of any security infrastructure is to hack the people. Now all of a sudden, you can social engineer people to give you access to your local desktop system. If that local desktop system has something like Cloud Enterprise, it's Katie barred the door on your data and anything else it's connected to. So it's like they found pay dirt there. Any adversarial party found pay dirt if they find Cloud Enterprise misconfigured and running on a desktop that they got access to.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And so if we use that as an example, all of a sudden everyone's got access to Claude. Claude's got broad access to everything.
Hmm.
So for an enterprise, have you assessed the risk in what Claude is doing? Have you done kind of like a pen test? Have you done an adversarial assessment to even see what can Claude do? That's where a lot of our customers are starting right now is, Copilot, Claude, other things. Just what can we get this thing to actually reveal so that we know what the risks are before a hacker gets access, right? And so that's crucially important just to understand, like, what's the risk in this tool we've already acquired.
Yeah, the tools are great, but if the people don't manage themselves properly with the front end and leave themselves vulnerable to being social engineered, it's not going to do any good.
Well, and that's the other interesting thing about sort of the social engineering, and part of what Encrypt AI does is, one of my favorite metaphors is, if you think about AI or an employee using AI, you usually have something that looks like a handbook. Hey, if we're going to give you access to this powerful tool, here's what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. And maybe that's something that comes up in the context of a good governance framework. Hey, all employees need to know this is what's acceptable or not acceptable. Um, that's the first step, is writing it down. That's the first step in a
Yes.
governance framework. However, we've moved pretty fast beyond writing it down. So for an employee, essentially you're giving them a handbook that says, here's AI, here's this incredibly powerful capability, and here's the rules. But that's just to the human. What Encrypt AI does is we can take that same handbook and operationalize it as, guardrails, as operational controls, so that if an employee is unaware of the rules in the handbook, or what the exact implications are of what they're doing, those guardrails can be there to keep everyone safe, but especially the enterprise to say, hey, actually, this particular request, could result in, PII being exposed, data being exfiltrated. So you start to need to put in those controls that operationalize that handbook.
Hmm.
And this
Absolutely.
is especially true as we start to look at agents. Agents have access to all kinds of things. How do you, if you think of an agent like an automated human, how do you give that handbook to the human? For Encrypt AI, that's our policy guardrails. You take that regulatory framework, that policy, you operationalize it as a set of controls, and you put those controls around your agents to make sure whatever they're doing, you have visibility into any situation where they might be violating policy.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier on the call how important it is to know that the adversarial parties are using AI. Okay, if that's the way it's going to be done, then that goes into the monitoring controls. All of a sudden, your AI needs to tell you if there's a slew of activity at 2 in the morning on somebody's laptop or network device sitting in the office in Topeka, Kansas. They've got to
That's
be
right.
able to see that, identify that, and respond to it immediately.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and so that's where you need those controls in place. The AI watching what your AI is doing because we're being
Yeah,
attacked by AI. It's a really
that's right.
interesting time. The dynamic nature of it is kind of crazy. So, from your perspective, if a company does have some kind of security incident, post acquisition, where do you think about where accountability breaks down? I think it's an interesting time right now because accountability and how this is handled organizationally is also sort of a work in progress.
Mhm. So it's not that the accountability breaks down; it's just never properly defined in the first place. That's where it typically goes wrong. It's like that old Spider-Man meme where you have three Spider-Mans all pointing to each other, right?
That's a
That's how that
perfect one.
works. Security is assuming legal's reviewed the risk. Legal assumed technology approved the model. Technology assumed business owned the outcome. The business assumed the vendor was responsible. Yeah, all sorts of interlays on people that are involved in this decision and are receiving positive impact on this, but nobody's taking accountability. So we talk about governance. Phase two of your policy is technology is responsible for this, legal is responsible for this, business is responsible for this. Just got to run through the whole gamut, and then that should serve any organization as a starting point for its incident response. And I'm a big believer in having incident response plans. You have to remember too, now that AI is involved, if you have an incident response plan, it's going to have to cover this because it could impact your privacy. It could impact uh, any sort of trade deals you may have going on. There's all sorts of ways this thing needs to go. So you need to build this into your governance model, this accountability up front.
Yeah, and I think that's a really crucial point, and it's something we're seeing too. And almost unlike any other transformation, AI is moving so fast. A lot of that organizational thinking or having that sort of governance maturity is catching up. Like we've already turned AI loose in the organization. Maybe there was pressure from the board to do that because of the productivity and potential differentiation possibility, right? Like AI can provide some amazing capabilities, but the organizational governance, who does what, who's responsible for what part of the risk is catching up.
Hmm.
So I have found, and it sounds like you too, in talking to customers that um, how they are thinking about risk organizationally is catching up. Like the tools are there. We can help them assess risk. We can put governance in place, but who owns that? What those
Hmm.
responsibilities are in the organization is still a work in progress. And we are seeing some companies, many companies, have sort of a chief AI officer and so forth. That's a step in the right direction, but it isn't
Hmm.
necessarily a solve for that risk and ownership challenge that you're describing.
Yeah,
So it seems like the first step is, the AI is already out there. So companies need to be creating those clear responsibilities at the org level as part of that
mhm.
overall governance frame.
Yeah, I'm at an AI conference right now talking about compliance, and somebody said it very well early in one of the sessions is, if you don't have accountability and ownership for the model, the data, the outputs, and the associated risk, if nobody owns all four of those, then accountability becomes fragmented, and that's problematic when it comes to governance.
Absolutely. And so maybe, you know, would you think then there's sort of an argument for some companies who are considering adopting AI or acquiring AI heavy targets? Maybe they shouldn't be doing that until they can demonstrate they know how to govern, what they have. It's kind of a funny tension right now because everyone's moving so fast. Um, but do you have the right governance framework in place on the people side, and do you have the right tools in place? So, do you think that some companies should be going slow, or is it more a matter of they should be thinking more holistically about governance?
Yeah, I'm not a big go slow guy. Being a former CISO and CIO, I'm never going to be the no person. I think the goal is to make things work as best you can with what you're given, right? So that means that instead of going slow, it means let's understand what's going on. Let's not hit the brakes, but let's understand the risks and what are the opportunities here associated with this tool. Now, when you're an early stage company that's developed a really awesome AI tool and you're getting a lot of traction in that space, when that acquisition, people are looking at acquisition, it moves in from, in addition to the opportunity you built, it also moves into revenue protection. So you have an investment that investors are looking to protect, and you still got to make sure you have the same type of throughput on the tool you created so it's still, quote, cool and viable. So we got to keep that in mind.
And so you're saying, let me understand that. So, and this is happening a lot. Companies are innovating, creating, capabilities with AI, and then there's consolidation happening. Those acquisitions are happening.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think what you're saying is, well, let me better understand. So you're saying you really need to understand in that technology that you're acquiring that it's not going to sort of put the larger business at risk reputationally. When you say protecting the revenue, you need to protect the revenue of that what you're acquiring. So that means making sure you've assessed the risk there, right? So that you're not going to violate customer trust or violate regulation, right?
Hmm.
So they're sort of assessing the acquisition target, and then there's making sure you have the governance framework in place to manage all of that.
That's correct. It's under, when mid process in an acquisition, somebody starts asking questions about AI and governance and models. Those, when we talk about trust and we talk about governance, those are absolutely essential, Nation. You said it much better than me. Those need to be considered as part of the decision. Does it mean that you slow down the decision on the acquisition? It just means that no, you have to understand the risks that are involved in that decision.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite quotes from having been in the sort of compliance and regulated enterprise space is, CISO's job, legal's job, risk's job is not to go slow, it's to manage the risk,
Yes.
right? And so if I'm acquiring some brilliant, innovative company that's got AI built into their product, and there's huge potential upside if we integrate that product into our platform, for example. First, I just need to understand what the risk is, and so that I can then put together the appropriate controls around it. So that might
Hmm.
be doing something like red teaming it, doing the equivalent of pen testing for AI. Like, what are the different risks in the models that are behind this application we're buying, this company we're buying? Do they have the proper controls in place around those risks? And if they don't, then how are we going to put those controls around that company that we're acquiring so that we can scale it without exposing ourselves to risk or and protecting the revenue that acquisition is throwing off.
Yeah, it's just it's another additional dynamic. AI has created this additional dynamic involved in the acquisition and funding lifecycle that it's its own standalone domain that needs to be assessed, just like cybersecurity, just like systems dev, just like financials. It's something that is has to be more than just a checklist. Yeah, they got AI, and yeah, they said it's governed. It does require a little bit deeper dive because of the unique risk that it creates for these type of transactions. One of the ways that here's a way from it. Well, if you're a company looking to acquire a company that's very AI heavy and AI intensive, the question I would ask is if you can't govern your own AI environment, what makes you think you're going to be able to do it within this organization you acquire?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So yeah, you need to be building that capability, that muscle, uh, either in parallel or ideally ahead of time before you're acquiring that AI heavy target. Um, and it's funny, you mentioned diligence. You know, lately in a lot of places I travel, particularly with startups, diligence is one of those painful topics. Nobody likes to go through it, but it's absolutely essential on so many layers to understand what are the risks, you know, in putting two companies together, right? What are the risks in this and what we're acquiring? Um, Now through automation, what I think, at least my perspective, be curious to hear yours, is um, no one loves diligence. Everyone wants it to go faster so that they can get to the other side, to grow companies together. Automated tools like what Enkrypt AI does seems to me to be a great way to accelerate that diligence process. So, in other words, if there's AI models, agents, and so forth in the target you're acquiring, being able to quickly assess what's the risk there, produce the reporting, do that in an automated way,
Mhm.
ideally should accelerate the whole diligence process and allow things to move faster. So is that how you look at things? And maybe it's analogous to pen testing where, before it would slow down until you could really assess the threat risk in something you're acquiring.
Yeah, it's a lot more complex than just doing a pen test engagement. There's different dynamics involved in every model, every bot that's out there that needs to be assessed. And if you don't have automated tools that can assess those risks associated and validate governance constraints and beliefs on the behalf of the company, you're going to be in trouble. I would also encourage companies that are going through acquisitions or thinking about being acquired and they're AI heavy is your investment in AI governance capabilities now is going to be an advantage for you in the marketplace when it comes to evaluating and pricing and integrating and things like that. All these organizations, they're building great tools. I mean, Nathan, you know as well as I do, you work at a company with a great tool. These are things that need to be governed and need to be, and the companies that do that well and can communicate and demonstrate that to a funding or a buyer, it just becomes a whole different story for everybody involved.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It made me chuckle because one of my favorite parts when we're working directly with our customers is we also go through, of course, an AI risk assessment. Um, and it's humorous to me because we get the questionnaire that says, are you are you governing AI properly? I'm being a little snarky here, but I'm just, we basically get a survey. Is your AI safe? And we're like, well, yes, it is. But, what we also like to say is like, well, our tool, our platform is literally designed to help you assess the risk in the AI that you're acquiring. And so it's
Yes.
always kind of ironic, but we're at an advantage there because we can immediately show, here's our own assessment of our own technology and our own models. So, we can use our tool to prove that to our customers. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, but
Well,
that,
it's
it's all
a
about speed.
stakeholder, Nathan. It's a stakeholder question too. You mentioned customers, it's buyers. They all want confidence around this concept of trust, which you mentioned early on in the conversation. We've got to trust what you're doing here. And lastly, if somebody's putting some funding into an organization or being part of an acquisition, they don't want to inherit governance and AI risks. They want to make sure that's managed as much as possible. So trust is essential here to success, especially in the acquisition model.
That's right. And I think it really does, diligence is all there to essentially enhance trust in a transaction. It's all there to show that what someone has said, what they have represented is well and true, and that you can prove it. And now with AI, we're moving into a world where you can start to prove what the risks are, and you can start to prove if the protection mechanisms and the governance, you can prove it not just in attestations in a legal document, but actually with tooling that shows that you've done a proper assessment on a technical level.
Yeah,
And so it's
and the companies
ultimately
that are
about,
able to demonstrate that governance real time, and they've got a model in place that can hone their governance model as it progresses, are going to be well ahead of the curve on this process.
that's right. And I think it all comes down to speed, or at least from our perspective, AI is moving fast. The market consolidation is going to move fast. Those companies that have the right governance frameworks, that have the right ownership model at the leadership level, and then have the right tooling that allows them to move very quickly, those are the ones that are going to win. Essentially, it comes down to setting up the organizational muscles so that you can move fast. Agility, it's funny, over and over through all these different transformations, it really comes down to, can you put in the right people, process, and tools that are going to help you move fast and enhance trust? All of this
Absolutely.
is about scaling trust. Maybe any final thoughts from you, Kurt, on sort of how organizations can move quickly.
Well, I always like to use the model. A lot of people don't realize the reason why they put brakes on a car is so it can go faster, and I think this is applicable here.
I
You
love
know,
that metaphor. Yeah.
we're not looking to stop the car. We're looking to maybe slow it down so we can get around the turns a little bit better before it goes over the sides. So I would just encourage anybody who's early stage that has an AI model, just invest some time in the governance component of that. That's going to go a long way in any sort of acquisition or discussions or due diligence. It'll go a long way.
Yeah, so for those companies that are, potentially acquisition targets, show that you've done the assessments, show that you have the governance there, and that's going to help you both with your buyers, but also potential acquirers. I have to imagine a lot of the enterprises, startups and so forth, are building AI in. They're being asked the same thing. What are you doing to govern this AI? How are you testing it for bias? How are you going to make sure that we're protected if we acquire your technology, either as a buyer or, in a potential, merger or acquisition situation. So yeah, so it's one of those things, like you said, people are like, hey, we're focused on the engine and making this car go fast. And it's like, yeah, but if you don't have the brakes, uh, people are going to say, well, that's an amazing vehicle, but I'm not going to get into it. Too much risk. So
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Kurt, for having this conversation with us today. Really fascinating to see how these dynamics are taking shape. I think Cherry Bekaert, with your focus on helping enterprises do the assessment, put the governance frameworks in place, and run the automations to be able to produce evidence, is hugely important to the market. Whereas we're scaling trust and trying to move fast. And from the Enkrypt AI side, the risks in AI are moving so fast that we really believe that you need to partner with experts like Cherry Bekaert, like Enkrypt AI, where we have deep expertise into AI security, and we're keeping an eye on the emerging threats. As we said earlier, every organization, or majority of organizations are going to be attacked in new and different ways, and it's moving so fast. You need a specialist who is really deep into where those risks are and where are the new risks coming from. So yeah, so it's exciting times for sure, and it's a wild ride as we try to hang on and see what's coming next.
No, these are all good discussions, and I'm glad that we're having conversations about them. There's a vast majority of these private equity deals, vast majority of these private equity deals. If there's AI involved, there's going to be some level of AI due diligence. So just buckle up and put a little work into it. It'll pay off, I promise.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for joining us today, and Lavanya, take us home.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for having this conversation. Kurt, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective on AI security and where organizations really need to focus as they rapidly adopt these technologies. And with that, to our listeners, I hope today's conversation gave you some practical insight in how to trust, compliance, and innovation can work together, and why identity-first security is also such a critical foundation for the future of AI. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and follow up with us at Enkrypt AI and Sherry Bekaert for more conversations around AI security and adoption. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.